Hi there, Araminta from the Cwicly team. In this video, we will be creating a comment design from scratch entirely in the Gutenberg editor with Cwicly. Instead of creating a whole new entire block dedicated to comments that will come with the cost of restraining design freedom, which is so important to us, we simply decided to reutilize the query block and use a WordPress comments class in the query builder. This means that you have access to all the filtering possibilities that come with the query block. To make the concept of how the comments work in Cwicly clearer, let's break down exactly how it works. Basically, the comments template is composed of comments and a form. Thus, in a query block, we have two main blocks: a query template that will repeat the desired design for our comments, and a div that will constitute a form containing all the necessary and desired elements, such as a main input container, which means the text area where users add their comment, login details for users acting as guests, and so on. This form is preset, so all you need to do is design, and Cwicly will do the rest in the background. Now that the concept is crystal clear, let's move on to actually building a comment template. Here we are in the Gutenberg editor. I have already added a section and set a column direction, which means that our elements will be on top of each other, as opposed to the row direction where our elements would be next to each other. Let's jump right in and add a query block. Let's untoggle the inherit from URL setting and open up the query editor. As you can see, by default, Cwicly sets the class to posts, which is best to use for archive posts, which we won't be needing today. So, let's select Posts and open the drop-down menu and select the WordPress Comments class. We will be needing comments in order for us to design a comment template that will be inheriting these comments. You can inherit these comments either from the current post you're editing with the current post parameter, or can choose from any given post on your installation by simply typing in its name. In this example, I will be inheriting from another post. For the moment, we have finished with the query builder, but we will come back to it once our template is created to better illustrate all the other parameters and their function. Let's exit the query builder and add our query template. In the Layout panel, let's set its display to flex instead of a grid, since in our case, flex suits the layout we want. We can also set a column direction. Let's add a div that will constitute our parent div. Its structure is the following: a div image that constitutes the commenter's avatar, and a div containing the author of the comment's name, the content of the comment, a moderation message that appears for users whose comment is awaiting approval, and lastly a div containing an edit button available only for the admin in this example that could be applied to any desired type of user, as well as a reply button, and lastly the time at which the comment was posted. Let's set a row direction. Now, let's start by adding a div that will constitute the avatar for the commenter. In the Advanced tab and Sizing panel, we can set an equal 30 pixel height and width. In the Borders panel, we can set 100% border radius for a round-looking div. Heading to the Background panel, we can set the type to image, set the source to dynamic, so that we can dynamically inherit the information. We can set the data to comment query and select the avatar option. Let's remember to set the size to cover, which tells the browser to ensure the image's complete covering of its container. We can also set left and top to 50%. In the Layout panel, we can set its position to absolute. We can now select our parent div and add a second parent div that will contain a div containing the author of the comment's name and the content of said comment. Lastly, it will contain a moderation message and div containing an edit and reply and timestamp of the post. We can set a column direction. Since our div image is absolutely placed, This div will lay on top of it, which isn't the desired effect. So all we need to do in order to correct this is to head to the Advanced tab and Margin and Padding panel and set a 40 pixel left margin to create enough breathing space between these two elements. Now let's add another div and set a row direction and set flex start so that our elements are centered to the top. Now we can add a 17 pixel font size paragraph with an 800 pixel font weight and capitalize it. We can now select the dynamic values setting and set the source to comment query and set the data to comment author. Now let's add our comment's content. So let's add a 16 pixel font sized paragraph. Selecting the dynamic values, and as previously, we can set the source to comment query and set the data to comment content. Both of these elements are too close to each other, so let's select the author's name and head to the Margin and Padding panel and set a 10 pixel right margin. We can now select our second parent div and add a paragraph that will constitute our moderation message. Let's give it a 15 pixel font size and set the italic property. Here, we will be adding a generic moderation message, so feel free to phrase it as you wish. Now we need to set a condition to this message, since we don't want every comment to unnecessarily have it when not needed. The way conditions work is you can choose to either hide or show a given block depending on what conditions you set. In our case, we only want our message to appear for the current user if that user published the comment, and if their comment hasn't been approved yet. So let's open the Conditions panel and add a condition. Our first condition is comment author is true, which means if the user is the comment author, then the message will appear. And our second condition is comment approved is false, which means if the comment has not been approved, then the message will appear. In this example, we leave the AND type selected, since both conditions have to be true for the conditioning to work. Our conditions don't end here. We also need to put a condition on our parent div, since we want our comments to appear on our page only if they have been approved or if the user is the comment author. So let's open the Conditions panel and add a condition. Our first one is comment approved is true. And our second one is comment author is true. As for the type, we can select the OR type, since our condition is true if either one of the set conditions is true. It doesn't need both to be true. In the Margin and Padding panel, we can set an equal top and bottom 5 pixel margin to better space out our message. Selecting our second parent div, we can add a final div containing the edit, reply, and time. We can set a row direction and center it. We can add a 14 pixel font-sized paragraph and capitalize it. I will also be setting a grey color to make it look less prominent/important. Let's set up the link wrapper for this paragraph to actually make it redirect to be able to edit the comments. We can leave the type to URL, but set its source to dynamic. The data is edit comment URL. Before we add a simple hover effect to this paragraph, we must set up some conditions for it, since we don't want every user to be able to edit comments. In this example, we have chosen the admin status as the one being able to edit comments. So if the user is an admin, then the paragraph will be present and they will be able to edit it. Let's open the Conditions panel and add a condition. The condition is user role equals administrator. As you can see, we can choose from several different possibilities for the roles available, such as editor, author, contributor, or subscriber. Now let's add a simple hover effect by switching to hover mode and setting a black text color. Next, heading to the Effects panel and Transitions panel, we can set a 0.5 second durations for smoother transition. In the Margin and Padding panel, let's also set a 5 pixel right margin to space out this element and future ones. Now we can copy link this paragraph block for a reply paragraph, since it will copy the former's style perfectly. The Cwicly linking feature allows you to have one main block that controls the style of other blocks. As a reminder, you can copy-paste using keyboard shortcuts, and if like me you want to copy link a block, simply use Command L and the trick is done. You'll know if you've done it correctly if in the tool block menu the link copied block lights up in orange, and if you receive in the left-hand corner the link copied block's activated message. As you can see, the styles of my first paragraph are linked to my new one, and if I tweak my first paragraph's font size or color, our new paragraph takes on the new style seamlessly. It's a great time saver feature because all we need to do is type in reply and set up the link wrapper. For the link, as with edit, we can leave the type to URL but set its source to dynamic. The data is comment reply URL. Lastly, we can copy link our first paragraph and paste it in. Here, in the dynamic values, we can set the source to comment query and set the data to comment time. You could leave the time to default. However, with comments, users are usually more interested and find it more relevant to know how fresh or old a comment is instead of at what time of the day it was posted. So we can select the format drop-down and select human time. As a personal preference, in the static text settings and in the after section, I am typing a Go to make it more realistic. In the typography panel, we can set our paragraph to a lowercase. Switching to hover mode, we can also set our grey color since there is no need for a hover effect for this element since it has no link. We have finished adding our blocks to the query template. However, before we start reply comments, I find that our comments are rather close to each other. So selecting our parent div and heading to the Margin and Padding panel, we can set an equal 7 pixel top and bottom margin. Our comment template looks great. However, it isn't yet amazing, since it's hard to distinguish between main comments from their replies and makes it inaccessible. To help with this, most comment template designs have the replies nested or inset beneath the comment they're replying to. We can achieve this look thanks to relative styling. We simply need to select the query template and select the plus symbol to add a style. Now we can edit its rules. Let's give it a familiar name such as nested comment. We can set the combinator to descendant, the selected type to class, and lastly type in CC query trialed as a class name. The class name is applied on the backend and frontend by Cwicly and targets the children. Now let's edit. In the Margin and Padding panel, we can set a 28 pixel left margin, which will create the nested comment effect perfectly. In this example, we kept it fairly simple, but you could radically style your reply comments by adding a different background color, setting a border or shadow, and so on. The design choices are unlimited. As you can see, it doesn't seem as though our relative styling is being applied. That's because our query isn't set hierarchically, which means it's showing our top-level comments instead of showing the comments in reply to the top-level comments. To correctly see our style, we simply need to select our query block and head to the query editor. In the comments category, we can toggle the hierarchical parameter. And magically, they are nested. Now let's head back to our relative style and visually see the changes we can bring to our reply comments, such as the background color and border width. Now we can build our remaining element, our form. To do so, we can select our query block and add a div. Let's apply the form tag. As you can see, when we do, the form settings appear, where we can select the action. In our case, it is comment. We can also set a column direction. We also need to replace our current block's ID by respond so that the form is recognized by the WordPress script Cwicly uses. In the margin and padding panel, we can also set an equal 4-pixel top and bottom margin. The structure of a form is the following: a div containing the necessary registration inputs for users acting as guests to comment, as well as a main input container containing the current user's avatar, the text area, submit and cancel buttons. We will start with the registration area. So let's add a div and set a column direction and flex start. This registration area will contain 3 different input areas for users to type in their name, email and website, as well as the option to log in. Below that, we will also have a cookies opt-in checkbox where users can choose to save their information by ticking the box. So let's add another div that will contain our 3 input areas, as well as the login. We can set a row direction and center it. Now we can add another div containing our 3 input areas. Let's set a row direction and center it. Let's add an input block. In the input settings panel, we can set the type to guest name and set the placeholder to name. Let's set a light grey background. In the Advanced tab and Typography panel, let's set a 13-pixel font size and capitalize it. In the Margin and Padding panel, we can also set an equal 8-pixel padding and set a 10-pixel right margin. In the Borders panel, we can set an equal 2-pixel border radius and set the border to none to be rid of the border given by default to inputs. Now we can copy link this block twice. For our second input, let's set the type to guest email and set email as a placeholder. Lastly, for our third input, we can set the type to guest URL and set your website as a placeholder. Now let's select the previous div and add a 13-pixel font-sized paragraph that will constitute our login. We can simply set up the link by leaving the type to URL but setting it dynamically. Then we can set the data login and you can choose to redirect to several different options, but in our case, we will redirect to the current page. Lastly, we can add our final div that will contain our checkbox input and a label. We can set a row direction and center it. Let's add an input block and in the input settings panel, set the type to cookies consent. In the Margin and Padding panel, we can set a 5-pixel right margin and 0-pixel top margin. Now we can add a 13-pixel font-sized paragraph where we will apply the label tag, which allows us to link the label to any input in general, or in our case, the checkbox input. Our elements seem squeezed together, so let's fix this by selecting the div containing our 3 inputs and login, and head to the Margin and Padding panel and set a 10-pixel bottom margin. We need to add a condition to our registration parent div, since we only want users to see it if they are guests or logged out. So let's open the conditions panel and add one. Our condition is comments registration equals to is false, which means that if the user is not registered, then the form will be present. We can also toggle the hide block for logged in users, since there is no use for them to see this registration area once they are registered. Now we can select our form div and add a div that will constitute a main input container containing the current user's avatar, the text area, submit and cancel buttons. We can set a row direction and center it. For our image div, we can simply copy link the one present in our query template, since we want exactly the same style. However, in the background panel, we can set the background image type, set it dynamically, set the data to WordPress, and set the user picture. We can also apply a tooltip to this div for an added helpful feature. In the tooltip panel, we can toggle the active setting and set the source to WordPress and select username. Now we can add another div that will contain our text area and submit and cancel buttons. We can set a row direction and center it. We can also set the same pale grey color we used previously for our free inputs. In the sizing panel, we can set 100% width. In the margin and padding panel, we can set a 40 pixel left margin so that it isn't placed on top of our absolute image div. We can also set a top and bottom 15 pixel padding and left and right 18 pixel padding. In the borders panel, let's set an 18 pixel border radius to round it up. Now let's add an input block that will constitute the text area. In the input settings, we can set the type to comment area and place write your comment as a placeholder. Let's also set a row of 1, which means how many lines we want to appear when we first load the page. We can also set a transparent background to get rid of the white background color given by default to input text areas. In the typography panel, we can set the font to inherit as well as a 15 pixel font size. In the sizing panel, we can apply 100% width for maximum text area to make it comfortable for writing comments. In the margin and padding panel, we can set a 15 pixel right margin. In the borders panel, we can set our borders to none. We can also head to the outline panel and set it to none as well, since browsers by default add a blue outline to inputs with text areas, with a blue color that isn't greatly appealing. So by setting our outline to none, we eliminate it. Now we can select our pale grey div and add an input that will constitute our submit button. In the input settings panel, we can set the type to submit button and add enter as a placeholder. Let's also set a transparent background to get rid of the white background given by default. In the typography panel, we can set a 14 pixel font size and capitalize it. In the borders panel, we can also set them to none. For the moment, when we hover on the submit button, our cursor doesn't change to a pointer, which might be off-putting for users. We can simply change this by applying a cursor interaction that makes it take on the pointer appearance. So let's head to the interactions panel and select the cursor drop-down and select pointer. So now, as you can see, when we hover on our button, our cursor changes to pointer. Speaking of hover, let's add a simple hover effect. Switching to hover mode, let's set a paler grey. Switching back to normal mode, in the Effects and Transitions panel, we can set a 0.5 second duration. Now let's add our final paragraph that will constitute our Cancel button. Since we want the same style as the Submit button, let's get the Submit button's class name and paste it in our Cancel button's additional classes. Let's also give it a red text color. Let's set up our link for it to act as a Cancel button. We can leave the type to URL, but set the source to dynamic, and set comment cancel reply as data. Let's also remember to set the tag to button. Now, let's select our registration area div and set a margin that matches our main input container. So in the margin and padding panel, we can set a 40 pixel left margin. We can also set a 15 pixel bottom margin for more breathing space. Before we move on to ensuring this design's responsiveness, I want my main input container to be able to be inset when I reply to comments, instead of it being placed on the same level as the top level comment. This is very important to ensure a visual level of comfort for users. We will simply be repeating the process we followed for our nested comment replies with the use of relative styling, by setting a margin that will slightly push our main input container to the right to create the inset look. However, we need to keep in mind that though we want our main input container to be inset when replying to comments, we don't want it to be so when we're not replying to a comment, because it would look oddly pushed for no apparent reason. Before we add a relative style, let's quickly copy our form's class name that we will be needing for a rule. So let's select our query and add a relative style by selecting the plus symbol. Now let's edit its rules. We can start by giving it a familiar name, such as nested main input container. Let's first add a rule targeting the query block. So let's set the combinator to descendant, the selected type to class, and type in the CC query class name, which is recognized and automatically added by Cwicly. Next, we can add a rule targeting our form div as a descendant of our query block. So let's set the combinator to descendant, the selected type to class, and paste in our form div's class name we copied earlier. To better explicit these rules, basically, when our main input container is a descendant of our query, when for example we're replying to a comment, it will apply our desired style of pushing/insetting our main input container. So if our form isn't a descendant of the query block, the style won't be applied, so we won't have the undesired inset look. Now let's edit this relative style. In the margin and padding panel, let's simply add a 30 pixel left margin. Now let's have a quick look at it on the front end to see the effect. As you can see, our main input container adapts its inset to whether it's in a reply to a comment or simply a standalone comment. Now let's head back to our design and ensure its responsiveness. Switching to tablet view, let's select the div containing our user's name and comment content and head to the layout panel and set a flex display. Let's set a column direction. Next, in the main input container in the div containing our free inputs and login, let's set the same thing. So we can set a flex display and set a column direction and flex start. Selecting our login, we can set a 10 pixel top margin. Lastly, on mobile view, selecting our registration area, let's set a 0 pixel left margin. Selecting our free input div in the layout panel, we can set a flex display and set a column direction. They now look too close to each other, so we can set a 5 pixel bottom margin. And there you have it. Our comment template is complete and ready for action. Now let's check out the front end and see how everything works. As you can see, everything looks great. Let's just add a comment in reply to another comment, for example to Cheryl. As you can see, my comment gets inset and I can cancel my reply at any given moment. I'll just type in a message. As you can see, Cwicly automatically adjusts the text window height to the content, which is handy for lengthy comments. I can hit enter and voila! As you can see, my conditions are working, since at the moment I'm logged in and I don't see the registration area nor the moderation message for the message I just posted. So let's check out what a guest would see, so let's open an incognito window. As you can see, now we do see the registration area, so let's test that out. I will fill in all the information boxes and check the cookie consent checkbox. I will type in a message. As you can see, I received the moderation message as intended, and if I scroll down to the registration area, my information has been saved. But if I open this page from another page, I no longer see the comment, since it's waiting for moderation. Now, let's lastly try out the login. So I'll log myself in. And voila, it works! Now I have access to the edit button since I am an admin. Thank you for watching. I hope this tutorial was helpful in understanding how to build a comment template completely from scratch in Gutenberg with Cwicly. Though we built a simple comment template design, it gives you the proper and necessary foundations to build your own comment templates and gives you the confidence to then explore different design opportunities and experimentations, which is the ultimate goal. If you have any questions or doubts, please don't hesitate to let us know down below. See you next time. Bye!